The sun hung low over the rocky expanse of New Dakota, casting long shadows across the colony's dust-choked streets. It should have been a normal day. Miners heading to the dig sites, engineers checking the water purifiers, traders bartering over spare parts. But instead, the people stood silent, gathered in the central square beneath the gleaming bulk of an Imperial warship. Sergeant Marcus, Mac, Dalton stood at rigid attention with the other Marines, his fists clenched at his sides. The Empire's so-called Governor-Regent, a towering insectoid encased in gold-plated battle armor, paced before them, his mandibles clicking with amusement. Humans, the creature rasped through a translator. Your submission to the Galactic Empire has been disappointing. Its dark eyes flicked over the assembled troops, unimpressed. You cower behind outdated weapons, clinging to primitive warfare like a drowning man to a stone. Mac forced himself to stay silent. He could feel the anger radiating from his squad. To his left, Private Jose Joey Alvarez shifted on his feet, his demolition vest loaded with carefully rationed charges. Corporal Deshaun Carter, their sniper, stood unnaturally still, but Mac could see his fingers twitching at his sides, already envisioning a rifle in them. Lieutenant Tom Halloway, their CO, kept his face blank, but Mac had served under him long enough to see the muscle in his jaw tighten. The Governor-Regent turned to a contingent of armored Imperial soldiers, tall, sinewy beings encased in iridescent plating. At a command, one of them stepped forward, dragging a struggling Marine to the center of the square. Private Sam Gibby Gibson. Mac's got twisted. Gibby was their heavy weapons guy, a farm boy from Nebraska who could shoot the wings off a fly at 200 yards. He was bruised and bloodied, but still glaring at the alien holding him. "Since your leaders insist you are warriors," the Governor-Regent said, "we offer you the chance to prove it. A trial by combat." The alien yanked a massive, two-handed energy blade from its hip and tossed it at Gibby's feet. "Defeat one of our warriors, and we will consider your kind tolerable." Mac didn't need to see Halloway's expression to know they were screwed. Gibby was strong, but he wasn't a swordsman. He fought with heavy guns, high-caliber rounds, and sheer firepower, none of which were options here. One of the Imperial elites stepped forward. He was bigger than the others, his armor gleaming in the red light of New Dakota's setting sun. The alien drew his own energy blade and activated with a deep hum. Gibby wiped the blood from his chin, spat on the ground, and bent to pick up the weapon. The fight was over in seconds. The Imperial warrior moved too fast, his strikes precise, overwhelming. Gibby tried to parry, but the sheer force behind the alien's swings battered him back. A sudden feint, a twist of the blade, and the energy weapon sliced through armor, through flesh. Gibby collapsed to his knees, staring at the glowing wound in his chest before toppling forward. Silence. The Governor-Regent laughed. "And that, humans, is why you will never be warriors." He gestured, and a pair of soldiers grabbed Gibby's lifeless body, dragging it toward the waiting warship like discarded refuse. Mac felt a deep, burning rage settle in his bones. He stole a glance at Halloway. The lieutenant's fists trembled at his sides, but his face remained cold, calculating. Then, with slow deliberation, Halloway stepped forward, voice steady. "You made your point," he said. "Now let my men bury their own." The Governor-Regent studied him for a long moment before waving a clawed hand. "Very well. It changes nothing. Your species is weak, your warriors unworthy. In 3 days, your colony will be stripped of its resources and your people conscripted into servitude. Accept your place, human. It is the only future you have." The aliens turned and marched back into their ship. The crowd began to disperse, hushed whispers filling the square. Mac didn't move. He stared at the blood-stained dirt where Gibby had fallen, his hands curling into fists. "We can't fight them head-on," Joey muttered. "No," Holloway agreed. He exhaled slowly, a fire burning behind his normally controlled eyes. "But we don't have to fight them the way they expect." Mac met his gaze. He knew that look. It was the same one Holloway had before every mission that no one was supposed to come back from. Carter broke the silence. "Then let's show these bastards what happens when they underestimate the United States Marine Corps." Mac nodded. Damn right. They would bury Gibby that night. But come morning, they'd make the Empire regret ever setting foot on New Dakota. The cave was damp, the air thick with the scent of churned earth and sweat. A single red light blinked from the jury-rig generator in the corner, casting erratic shadows across the jagged walls. Outside, the winds of New Dakota howled over the rocky peaks, masking the low murmur of voices inside. Sergeant Marcus Mac Dalton knelt over a spread of scavenged equipment, wiping the grime from his knife with slow, deliberate movements. Across from him, Private Jose Joey Alvarez tinkered with a cluster of detonators, his fingers moving with practiced ease. A few feet away, Corporal Deshaun Carter cleaned his rifle, his sharp gaze flicking toward the entrance every few seconds. Lieutenant Tom Holloway stood near the center, running a hand through his dirt-matted hair. "We can't fight them head-on," he said. "We don't have the numbers, the firepower, or the tech. But that doesn't mean we can't hit them where it hurts." Joey snorted. "Yeah, because last I checked, those shiny bastards have shields that eat bullets for breakfast." Mac finished with his knife and sheathed it. "Maybe bullets aren't what we should be throwing at them." Holloway's eyes narrowed. "Go on." Mac gestured at the pile of salvaged weapons they dragged in from an abandoned colonial outpost. Old M16s, a few shotguns, and an assortment of grenades. None of it particularly helpful against the Empire's energy-resistant armor. But at the center of it all, standing like an ugly relic from another age, was an M40 recoilless rifle. It was an old beast, long, heavy, and brutally simple. A 106mm smoothbore cannon that fired high-explosive shells with enough force to reduce armored vehicles to scrap. Outdated by modern Earth standards, sure, but the Empire had never fought against anything like it. Joey's brows shot up. "You really think that relic can crack their armor?" Carter let out a low chuckle. "They built their defenses to stop energy weapons, not raw explosive force." He smirked. "Dumbass." Holloway crouched next to the weapon, running his fingers along its battered frame. "We need to modify the rounds. High explosive might not be enough. We need armor-piercing. Something that can punch through their shields before the payload detonates." Joey nodded slowly, rubbing his chin. "Shape charges. I could rig something up, but we'd need detonite, maybe some tungsten cores if we're lucky." Mac cracked his knuckles. "Then we hit an Imperial supply convoy. They're stockpiling resources from the colony before the big sweep. If we can get to one of those transports, we'll find what we need." Holloway stood, his decision made. "All right. We move at first light. No more waiting. No more running." The attack was quick, brutal, and over in minutes. The Imperial convoy had been crawling along a dirt road in the valley below, moving toward their command center with a payload of stolen colonial goods. The aliens had grown careless, arrogant. They didn't expect an ambush. Mac had led the charge, Carter covering from the ridge with his rifle. Joey had placed a well-timed charge beneath the lead walker, and when it detonated, the explosion sent the towering machine crashing to the ground in a plume of dust and flame. They'd cut through the disoriented soldiers with ruthless efficiency, taking what they needed before slipping away into the mountains. Now, back in the cave, Joey was hunched over the stolen materials, adjusting the warheads with precise movements. Carter stood nearby, loading rounds into magazines, while Holloway went over their next steps. Mac sat against a cave wall, watching the firelight flicker over the freshly polished M40. Joey let out a low whistle. "All right, gentlemen, I present to you armor-piercing Hellfire." He lifted a modified shell, its warhead glinting in the dim light. "Shape charge, reinforced core. This thing will punch through their shields like butter, then detonate inside their armor. Say goodnight, sweet alien prince." Holloway took the round, turning it over in his hands. He exhaled sharply. "This might actually work." Carter smirked. "It'll work. Question is, how many of these bastards do we get to test on?" Mac leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "One shot won't be enough. We need to make a statement. Something they can't ignore." Holloway nodded. "We hit their command outpost." Silence fell over the cave. Even Joey stopped his tinkering, looking up with raised eyebrows. "That's suicide," Carter muttered. "Not if we do it right," Holloway said. "They're gathering forces for the final sweep in 2 days. If we take out their main outpost before then, we cripple their entire operation." Mac rolled his shoulders. "Then we make it count." The fire crackled, the weight of their decision settling over them. Joey grinned, lifting one of the shells. "Time to see what happens when you throw a rock through a stained glass window." Mac nodded, a slow smile creeping onto his face. "Let's teach these bastards what human ingenuity looks like." The wind howled over the ridgeline, sweeping dust and grit across the Marines as they lay prone, watching the Imperial outpost through battered binoculars. Below them, the enemy compound sprawled like a metal scar against a landscape. Sleek Durasteel walls, energy barriers humming at key entry points, and the faint glow of alien floodlights casting eerie halos over patrolling soldiers. Sergeant Marcus Mac Dalton adjusted his rifle's strap and exhaled. Hell of a fortress. Corporal Deshaun Carter lay beside him, peering through his scope. "Yeah, and those turrets will turn us into barbecue if we walk in through the front door." Lieutenant Tom Holloway crouched nearby, mapping their approach on a scrap of stolen parchment. "That's why we're not walking in. We're blowing a hole through their defenses and forcing them into a fight they can't win." Private Jose Joey Alvarez tapped a detonator pack strapped to his chest. "Got enough explosives to make 4th of July look like a backyard barbecue. Just need to get close enough to plant them." Mac grunted. "Then we better not screw this up." Time ticked forward, the weight of the coming fight settling into Mac's bones. No second chances. No do-overs. Either they sent a message tonight, or they died proving a point. Holloway checked his watch. 10 minutes. They descended the ridge in silence, boots pressing carefully against loose shale. The outer perimeter loomed closer, the faint blue shimmer of an energy fence dancing in the air. The Marines spread out, moving in a formation as old as war itself. Joey knelt by the first fence node, pulling a small device from his belt. A few quick keystrokes, a low beep, and the barrier flickered out. "Go, go, go!" They slipped inside, hugging the shadows. Mac's grip tightened on his rifle as they maneuvered between stacks of stolen colonial supplies, crates of rations, medical kits, and fuel cells, all waiting to be shipped back to some Imperial core world. A low chittering sound echoed ahead. 2 guards, their elongated forms shifting in the dim light. Mac raised his weapon, but Carter moved first. A single suppressed shot snapped through the air, and one of the aliens crumpled before it could react. The second barely turned before Mac drove his knife up between its ribs, feeling the shudder of its last breath. They moved deeper. The M40 Recoilless rifle was strapped across Private Sam Gibson's old pack, now carried by Mac. It had been modified, streamlined, and prepped for one purpose: to prove that kinetic force still had a place in modern war. Holloway signaled. They were in position. Joey placed the last of the charges, whispering under his breath as he locked them into place. "Say your prayers, Ugly." Then the floodlights blazed to life. A mechanical alarm screamed through the compound. The air shimmered as reinforcements rushed forward, sleek rifles snapping into position. Carter cursed. "They made us." Max swung the M40 forward, dropping to one knee. "Then let's give them something to be afraid of." He sighted the nearest enemy walker, a bipedal monstrosity with twin energy cannons mounted on its arms, and squeezed the trigger. The cannon roared. The shape-charged warhead slammed into the machine's leg joint, shearing through the energy, shielding like it wasn't even there. A heartbeat later, the explosion ripped through the metal, sending the walker crashing sideways in a burst of flame. The battlefield erupted. Joey detonated the charges, and the entire east wall of the compound buckled inward, flames licking the night sky. Mac loaded another shell. Carter picked targets with machine-like precision, dropping soldiers before they could reach cover. Holloway led them forward, cutting through enemy lines with ruthless efficiency. A second walker lumbered into view, its weapons primed. Mac lined up another shot. "Come on, you son of a..." A bolt of plasma streaked past, burning the air inches from his head. He barely flinched as he adjusted his aim, exhaled, and fired. The shell punched into the walker's chest plate, then detonated from the inside out. The machine toppled backward, collapsing into a heap of molten metal and screaming alarms. The aliens faltered. They weren't used to this. To humans who fought with brute force and raw defiance instead of calculated precision. Their battle doctrine had never accounted for the sheer stubbornness of a species too dumb to die quietly. Max saw it in their movements, the hesitation. They weren't invincible. "Push!" Holloway roared, rallying the squad. They surged forward, cutting through the remaining resistance like a scalpel through flesh. The last charge detonated near the command center, and the entire compound shuddered. The control tower collapsed in on itself, sending a thick plume of smoke into the sky. By the time the dust settled, only the Marines were left standing. Mac pulled off his helmet, breathing in the scent of burning metal. Carter let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "You think they got the message?" Joey kicked over a fallen enemy rifle, unimpressed. "If they didn't, we got plenty more where that came from." Holloway gazed toward the horizon, where the Imperial warship loomed in the distance. "They'll be coming." Max slung the M40 back over his shoulder. "Let 'em." The sky burned red as the Imperial warship descended, its silhouette blotting out the stars. Wind howled through the ruined outpost, whipping smoke and dust across the battlefield. The air was thick with the scent of scorched metal and ozone, a grim testament to the carnage left behind. The compound was gone, reduced to rubble, its command tower a smoldering husk. But the fight wasn't over. Sergeant Marcus Mac Dalton knelt behind the wreckage of a fallen walker, checking the M40's chamber. The weapon was hot, the recoil bruising his shoulder, but it had done its job. The Empire had learned, in the most violent way possible, that humans weren't fragile things to be herded like cattle. Lieutenant Tom Holloway crouched beside him, his jaw tight, as he watched the enemy reinforcements spill from the descending warship. They're bringing in shock troops. Heavy armor, air support. They're not taking any more chances. Corporal Deshaun Carter wiped sweat from his brow, slapping a fresh mag into his rifle. "That means we pissed M off." Private Jose Joey Alvarez grinned as he hefted a last satchel charge. "Gotta love a sore loser." The ground trembled as the first shock troopers touched down, towering figures clad in thick, segmented armor. Their weapons glowed with sickly green energy, pulse rifles that could tear through flesh and steel alike. They moved in lockstep, precise, disciplined. The Marines weren't. Fire at will. Holloway barked. The night exploded into chaos. Carter was the first to take his shot, dropping one of the advancing troops with a pinpoint round to the neck joint. Mac braced himself, raising the M40, and let loose another shell. The explosion hurled bodies into the air, sending armored limbs scattering across the battlefield. But the Empire had learned. Their shields adjusted, their formations tightened. The second wave came in harder, faster, advancing through the firestorm without hesitation. Pulse rifle fire streaked past, cutting through stone and metal. Mac ducked as a blast tore a crater where he'd been standing seconds before. His ears rang, but he forced himself up, reloading the M40 with practiced hands. Joey was already moving, slipping between the wreckage like a ghost. "Cover me," he shouted. Carter laid down suppressive fire, forcing the enemy into cover. Joey sprinted forward, vaulting over a fallen girder, and slapped a charge onto a supply tank. He spun, sprinting back, and detonated it mid-stride. The explosion was deafening. Fuel ignited in a pillar of flame, engulfing half the enemy line. For a moment, silence. Then the warship's guns roared. A barrage of plasma rained down, turning cover into slag. Mac hit the dirt, feeling the heat sear the air above him. The battlefield was dissolving around them. They couldn't hold. Holloway keyed his radio, voice sharp. "All units, fall back. Regroup at the secondary ridge." Carter fired off his last clip before hauling Joey to his feet. "Move, move." Mac grabbed the M40, sprinting after them, heart pounding. The ridge was their last stand. If they fell there, there'd be nothing left but corpses and scorched earth. They reached the high ground just as the next wave advanced. Mac turned, dropping to one knee, lining up a shot. The warship hovered overhead, casting a shadow that swallowed the valley below. Its main cannon began to glow. They were about to be wiped off the map. Mac exhaled. He had one shot. The M40 was heavy in his hands, its barrel scarred, its paint stripped, but had never failed him. He aimed. The warship's cannon reached critical charge. He fired. The shell screamed through the air, slamming into the exposed vent of the ship's main battery. The impact sent a ripple of fire through the superstructure, detonating fuel lines, igniting something deep within its core. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the warship erupted. Flames burst from its hull, molten debris raining down in every direction. The force of the explosion sent shockwaves through the valley, knocking Imperial troops off their feet. The ship lurched, engines sputtering, before crashing into the mountainside with a thunderous roar. Silence. Then a ragged cheer. Max slumped back, breathless, watching the wreckage burn. The Empire had come expecting submission. Instead, they'd found defiance. Holloway clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Hell of a shot, Marine." Carter grinned, tossing his empty rifle aside. "Guess they're rethinking that humans are cowards speech." Joey let out a breathless laugh, collapsing onto the dirt. "Next time, let's fight someone dumber." Mac wiped the sweat from his brow, staring at the smoldering remains of the warship. "They'll be back," he said. Holloway nodded. "Yeah, but next time, they'll know what's waiting for them." Mac looked down at the M40, its barrel still warm. The old warhorse had done its job. They all had. Humans weren't the strongest. They weren't the fastest. But when the universe came knocking, expecting them to bow, they sent a message written in fire.